What are you doing, Greg?
I'm just checking out the first edit of Steve's history portion of the Isandlwana episode.
Oh, cool.
This week on Little Wars TV, we're going to talk about the greatest defeat the British Army ever suffered during the colonial period, the Battle of Isandlwana. Now I know what you're thinking. We're a bunch of guys from Pennsylvania, so we're out in some field near our homes, right? Wrong. Didn't see that one coming, did you?
Oh no. Oh my god. Ed, quick, go check our travel account.
It's empty!
Son of a...
Sawubona, and welcome to Little Wars TV. I'm Steve, and yes, I'm actually here in beautiful KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. For most of my life, I've dreamed of visiting Zululand, and over the next few weeks, in bonus videos we'll be posting here on the channel, I'll take you along with me as I visit some of the most famous Zulu battlefields, and as I sit down to chat with some local experts. Today, however, our focus is on the Battle of Isandlwana, and in just a few minutes we'll see if some of our stalwart club members can rewrite history on the tabletop using thousands of 6mm miniatures. As always though, before we get to that game, we're going to talk a little bit about what actually led up to this battle.
In the early 1870s, South Africa as we know it today didn't exist. Instead, its vast expanses were controlled by a mishmash of European colonies, independent republics, and tribal kingdoms. On the frontier of the British holdings in the area was the colony of Natal. Located along the coast northeast of the Cape Colony, Natal was bounded by a pair of Boer republics in the north and Zululand in the east. While the British relationship with the Boers was complicated, relations with the Zulus were by and large good. That would begin to change in 1874 with the arrival of the new British South African High Commissioner, Sir Henry Bartle Frere. A dedicated Confederationist, Frere wished to unite most of southern Africa under the British flag. One of the biggest obstacles he faced, however, was the Zulu Empire. Over the next few years, Frere, along with the governor of Natal, issued various demands on the king of the Zulus, Cetshwayo Kamapande, regarding how he ruled his people. Frere also withdrew support from the Zulus in their ongoing border dispute with the Boer Transvaal Republic, and all the while Frere was sending a steady stream of reports back to the colonial office in London, claiming alarm at the growing Zulu threat to British holdings. In short, Frere was actively working to precipitate a war. The pretext for this war would finally arrive in 1878, when two wives of a local Zulu chieftain fled into Natal, but were forcefully kidnapped, returned, and executed by some of the chieftain's relatives. In response, Frere delivered to the Zulu king an ultimatum that, among other things, required Cetshwayo to surrender the perpetrators, disband the Zulu army, and turn over certain decisions to a British representative. Frere knew that Cetshwayo could not agree to these demands. As such, he began preparations for an invasion of Zululand to take place in January of 1879. While he hadn't gotten permission to wage such a war from the colonial office, Frere gambled that a war would result in such a quick victory, London would have no time to stop it and would simply accept the results. Command of the invasion force was given to Lieutenant General Frederick Thesiger, 2nd Baron Chelmsford. He devised a plan that would divide his forces into multiple columns that would enter Zululand and converge on the Zulu capital of Ulundi, forcing Cetshwayo's surrender. On January 11, 1879, with Cetshwayo having failed to even respond to Frere's ultimatum, the invasion began. Chelmsford himself traveled with the 3rd column of the invasion, the largest at over 4,000 men, which crossed the Buffalo River and entered Zululand at a little place called Rorke's Drift. Over the next 9 days, the column, which relied on ox-drawn wagons to haul supplies, moved at a crawl and only made it roughly 10 miles. On January 20th, as the column made camp at the base of a rocky hill named Isandlwana, Chelmsford's biggest concern was just how he was going to catch the Zulu army and force them into battle. Unknown to Chelmsford, however, it was the Zulu army that was preparing to bring that fight to him. By January 21st, their vast force of roughly 25,000 warriors was only a few miles to the northeast of Isandlwana. Chelmsford began getting reports of Zulus in the area, with the biggest force reported to be off to the southeast of the camp, not the northeast. As a result, Early on the morning of the 22nd, he led about half of the column's forces in pursuit of these Zulus to try and force an engagement. This left about 2,000 men to defend the camp under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Poulain. As the sun came up and the morning wore on, Poulain became aware that several thousand Zulus were on or behind the Nyoni Ridge to his north. When Colonel Anthony Durnford, commander of the invasion force's second column, arrived in camp with hundreds of mounted troopers at around 10:30, Poulain was prepared to turn over defense of the camp to him. But Durnford wasn't interested in hanging around. Durnford led his troopers out and down the long valley east of the camp, eventually disappearing behind the distant conical hill named Amatsushane. Shortly thereafter, Poulain received word that the main Zulu army had been located to his northeast, nowhere near where Chelmsford was chasing them. To prepare for an expected attack, Poulain arranged a long firing line of his regular infantry and then waited for the Zulus to arrive. The fight started in the east, down the valley, as a regiment of Zulus pursued Durnford's mounted troopers as they made their way back to camp. Then thousands more Zulus poured over the Nyoni Ridge, moving from east to west and coming face to face with Poulain's firing line. The right end of Poulain's firing line curled back to allow Durnford's troopers, who were defending a dry creek bed, or donga, to protect their right flank, and the Zulu center simply could not advance against the murderous British volley fire. Using the classic Zulu horns of the buffalo attack, however, the Zulu commander Nchingwayo Kamahole could already see that victory would be his. While his center, the chest of the buffalo, might be pinned down, the left horn facing Durnford was slowly advancing as Durnford's ammunition supply dwindled, while the Zulu right horn, which was sent around behind Isandlwana, would soon arrive. The later stages of the battle unfolded just as Nchingwayo foresaw. Durnford was eventually forced to evacuate his donga, leaving the British firing line exposed on the right, while the Zulu right horn burst upon the camp to the left of the British firing line. As the sky darkened during a poetically timed solar eclipse, the Zulus surrounded and whittled the British down until the last redcoat fell. When Chelmsford and his men returned a few hours later, it was to a site that would thenceforth be known as the location of the greatest loss the British Army ever suffered during the colonial era. Students of the battle have wondered if there was a way that the British could have won the day despite the disparity in numbers. That's one of the subjects I broached with local expert Doug Rattray of Fugitives Drift Lodge in a conversation we'll post in the coming weeks here on Little Wars TV. Be sure to check that out, as well as my chat with another of Fugitive Drift Lodge's expert guides, a man whose grandfather and great-grandfather fought in the battle.
Now that you know what happened historically, let's head back to the club and see if our British players can do a little better than their historical counterparts.
Well, welcome back, Steve. I hope that blowing the club's entire travel budget was worth it.
Oh, it certainly was. The trip was amazing. I think we can all agree that it's one thing to read about a battle, it's another thing entirely to actually walk the ground.
Well, it definitely looks like you put a lot of what you learned on your trip into this game board. It looks fantastic.
Thanks, Dave. I can honestly say that I put more time and effort into this board than any other I've ever made. That's because I didn't just want it to look good, I also wanted it to be as accurate as possible, with 1 inch representing 60 yards. It was no quick task to paint up the miniatures for this battle either. Each figure represents roughly 10 men, and every one of them comes from Bacchus 6mm colonial range. If you're a longtime Little Wars TV fan, you know we're all big fans of Bacchus 6mm miniatures here, and we're thrilled to have them as a sponsor of this episode. If you'd like to see just how I recreated this battlefield and how I went about painting 2,000 6mm Zulu warriors, be sure to stick around Little Wars TV, as we'll be posting tutorials on both of those subjects in the weeks to come.
Okay, so what set of rules are we going to be using today?
Excellent question. Today we're going to be using The Men Who Would Be Kings, written by David Mercy and published by Osprey Wargames.
Isn't that more of a skirmish rule set?
It is, but it's my favorite rule set for the colonial era, and with just a few rules tweaks, it works great for fighting large-scale engagements like Isandlwana in a reasonable amount of time. If you're curious about just what those tweaks are, register for our free stuff page at littlewarstv.com, as we'll be posting them there soon. Now before we kick things off today, perhaps I ought to explain a little bit about the situation at the start of our scenario. At this point, Colonel Poulain knows that several thousand Zulus are somewhere to his north over the Nyoni Ridge, and that some are moving around to his left. As a result, Poulain has placed all his regular infantry into a long, north-facing firing line stretching from Isandlwana in the west to the conical hill known as Amatsushane in the east. He's placed his 2 lone artillery pieces in the center of that line. Meanwhile, Colonel Durnford is headed back with thousands of Zulus in pursuit, and just off our table. The British are about to be in the same precarious situation they found themselves in historically. The question is, can our players do better this time around? And today, our 2 British players are Ed and Chow. Specifically, Ed, you'll command the British regulars and native infantry as Colonel Poulain. Chow, you'll be playing Colonel Durnford, and won't just command your own mounted troops, but all the cavalry on the board. Your objective today, survival, is easier said than done. Complicating matters, you're going to be very limited in how much you 2 can communicate with each other, and you're both going to have to worry about keeping your men supplied with ammunition. And that means Tom, Greg, and Dave, you're going to be our Zulus today. Your goal is total annihilation of the British invaders. Tom, you'll be in overall command as Nchingwayo Kamahole and control the chest of the Zulus' fabled Horns of the Buffalo formation.
Yengi Vonga Kikulu.
Greg, you'll command the Zulu left horn, and Dave, you'll command the right horn.
Yebo Baba!
And with that, I think we're ready to get started.
Hello, I'm Chow. Today I get to play Colonel Durnsford. I'm in charge of about 350 mounted men plus a rocket battery. The main body, which is under my direct command, is currently engaged in a fighting withdrawal. Historically, I don't start this battle in very good position. I do believe that one thing I will do is that I am not even going to attempt to have the rocket battery escape. I'm just going to align it in a direction for perhaps I may get a shot or 2 off before they're overwhelmed. I will try to pull Colonel Durnsford back closer to the camp and then reposition my mounted troops in a way to support what would then be the right flank of the 24th.
Hello, I'm Ed. I'll be playing the role of Colonel Henry Poulain today. I'll have 6 companies of British infantry from the 24th Regiment, about 600 men, 2 pieces of artillery, and some accompanying native chaps. We've got ourselves in a bit of a sticky wicket here, and I find myself too far from my camp, which I had been ordered to defend, and yet not close enough to my brother officer who has asked for my support. Frankly, I think we're in trouble. I guess we'll try and form square, make it back to the ammo carts if possible, and if nothing else, we'll teach those beggars the value of a Martini Henry and a bayonet.
All right, so today the Zulus have about 20,000 men organized into 8 regiments, and those are divided into the traditional chest and left and right horn.
Now, I should point out that one of the 8 regiments, which is mine on the left horn, is enormous. It's like 3 times the size of any of the other regiments. Well, I think from the Zulu point of view, the only really big decision we have pre-battle is, are we going full ahead full to try to catch the British before they have time to redeploy at all? Or do we want to try to slow play this a little bit to give the right horn of the buffalo a little bit more time to get around?
Yeah, I think I definitely lean towards slow play, using any method we can to let some forces build up, spread out, and so that we don't get bogged down and are able to bring as much mass to bear at the right time.
Okay.
Yeah, and make sure you leave enough space so you can really form those units out.
Good point.
As the action gets underway, Chow is the only player allowed to move his forces during the British half of each turn, since he's the only player with units who have a sense of what's about to arrive on the board. It's quickly clear that he hopes to consolidate many of his separated cavalry forces to the east of the camp, as he has Durnford fall back around the south of Amatsushane, while most of his militia forces leave Ed's firing line to move towards him. Falling back from the eastern table edge is the right move for Durnford, as on the Zulu half of turn 1, their 1st regiment arrives on the board in hot pursuit. As the roughly 3,500 men of this regiment, the Uve, stream onto the board, Tom and Greg take a moment to get a table's eye view, happy to note that they remain out of sight of Ed's firing line. As a result, Ed still won't be allowed to adjust to face this growing threat to his right flank. That changes shortly thereafter, however, as after Chow continues his retreat with Durnford's horse, the lead elements of Greg's massive 6,000-man Ngomba Makosi regiment begin to flow over the Inyoni Ridge at the northeast corner of the table. Joining him is Tom's 1st Regiment, the Umbonambi. They're immediately visible to Ed's firing line, and on his next turn he begins to curl back his easternmost companies to prepare to meet them. He also moves his native infantry forwards towards Chow's horse as those horse approach the Ngoyane Danga. Might Chow possibly be looking to take up the same position Durnford did historically? Since Ed and Chow's units still aren't close enough to communicate, Ed can only guess. Meanwhile, northeast of Amatsushane, Chow's grim assessment of his rocket battery's chances prove prescient. They're already surrounded on 3 sides and facing imminent destruction, but Chow makes sure they'll get off some shots and go down fighting. In the next turn, a 4th Zulu regiment, the Umsijo, begins streaming over the Nyoni Ridge as Greg's Uve round the southern slopes of Amatsushane, while Chow does indeed take up a position in the Ngonyane Danga, seemingly prepared to make sure that it, once again, gets renamed Durnford's Danga. Ed also opens fire with his artillery at Tom's newly arrived warriors, who, as the Zulus planned before the battle, don't rush headlong down the ridge into the teeth of Ed's firing line. Though the artillery won't do much damage, in Men Who Would Be Kings, even a single hit can be enough to pin a unit for a full turn if they fail their leadership test. As a 5th Zulu regiment comes on the table to the north of Ed's firing line, it seems to hit both Ed and Chow simultaneously that they've largely been drawn into the same defensive deployments that ultimately led to disaster for the British historically. As a result, Chow and Ed both begin falling back even further. Chow withdraws to set up a new defensive line at the smaller western Donga, while Ed closes up his firing line and his regulars begin an organized retreat toward the camp. Meanwhile, time has run out for Chow's rocket battery.
Alright, so we have our first combat.
Oh, this is going to go swell.
3. Hey, you got a hit on me.
I got a hit on you.
I didn't get that many hits on you.
You got enough.
I think you got enough.
2. I got what? Oh, I got just enough.
Yep.
On the very next turn, it's clear that Ed and Chow's timing was perfect, as the 1st Regiment of Dave's Zulu right horn appears to the northwest of Isandlwana, and Dave makes it very clear that he's got some nasty things in store for the British invaders.
The situation is that we have been bah-humbugged by the Zulus, apparently, Ed.
Yeah, they appear to be aggravated.
It does look like we're trying to concentrate back on the camp. Hopefully that plan works out.
Well, I think that's what Henry should have done from the get-go. We're going to try and fall back on the ammo and water carts.
Yeah, when I looked at this immediately, there's no way that I can keep his command out that far. So that's why I've drawn back towards you, because it's too much space to try to defend. We're going to get overrun. Well, we're probably going to get overrun anyway, but we'll see what happens.
It looks like, everything's going according to plan for us. There's been very little British action. They've withdrawn further and further each time.
We're not pressing them. We're giving them time to do it. I don't know whether our plan is the right plan or not, but we have not been advancing rapidly.
I think that's about to change. I think it should.
We're probably at that point now that the right horn has arrived.
Yeah, and only 1 regiment of mine is on the board. I still have 2 regiments that are going to come in.
I mean, are we waiting a couple more turns for Dave?
I don't think so. I think you should try to engage them, because my next regiment's coming on turn 10. I've got a regiment coming on turn 12. So I think you want to get them engaged in combat before those units come in behind them.
I think we're about ready to
time to sprint.
Celebrate it. Yeah.
Zulu!
Zulu! As the Zulu regiments begin to press in on the eastern half of the table, Ed and Chow are able to create a ragged firing line that might very well have a chance of holding off the onslaught once their enemy closes within volley fire distance. The one fly in the ointment to any such plans, however, is Dave's right horn. All of Dave's regiments are now on the table and appear poised to sweep through the camp and come upon the British line from their rear. All that's there to stop them are a small collection of Chow's cavalry that he left behind for just this purpose. By now, the battle has begun in earnest as the British firing lines begin to open up. Ed's regulars start to blow gaps in Tom's regiments as they begin to rush towards him to the north, while Chow is, for the moment, succeeding in holding off Greg in the south. The power of massed British rifle fire is on full display.
Yeah, the Martini Henry rifle firing a .577 caliber round, soft lead. This is a monster. This is a monster on impact. It is a lever action breech loader, revolutionary for its time, and it served decades in British hands. They could fire what, up to 12 rounds a minute in fast independent fire. I know you currently are working with volley fire, which is a bit slower, but is it particularly devastating?
Oh, they're close in now. I think it's time to go independent fire at will.
Yeah.
Whatever your shoulder can take.
Yeah. This thing's a beast. It is heavy. I wouldn't want to march around all day in the sun with this thing. My God. But yeah, it was an excellent rifle. There's a reason why it's well remembered in British history.
Despite the casualties he's inflicting, Ed knows that Chow's handful of horse behind Isandlwana can't guard his rear forever, and he decides this is the time to abandon his artillery, form square, and to do so around the ammo wagons near camp. This leaves Chow and the native infantry exposed, but Chow's ready and dispatches a message to Ed that he intends to try and fall back from the donga to be ready to hit Dave's right horn in the flank if they make a move on Ed's square. This plan may be too little too late, however, as before Chow is able to fully extricate himself from the donga, Greg's regiments pour across and crash into him. Meanwhile, Dave successfully maneuvers a unit of his Zulus around the northern end of Isandlwana, avoiding Ed's volley fire and into direct contact with the British square. Might the battle already be about to end?
Well, you've done your bit, Chow. Well done.
Thank you.
Ride out if you can make it.
I won't leave you, Ed.
No, you're on horseback. We're in a square. There's worse places to be. I still am hopeful.
I see one thing, and it is the craziest thing. The truth of it is looking in that direction towards the major ridge. It's thin. It's thin in Zulus. Is it possible to blast your way through there and separate the two wings of the Zulus?
Well, I didn't want to confess to that, but yeah, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, how the devil do I get out of here?
The
square can move, you know.
So, what's next, Ed? What do we do?
I stay in square and roll high.
My man.
We finally have our first close combat coming up of the turn, and down on my end of the field, we've hit the donga. And we finally caught up with Chow's cavalry. I'm feeling like we could finally roll up the flank with a good die roll this turn. Did you guys get in down on the other end?
I made it, and so my guys are going to wash their spears in some Brits. And
Is that the square?
Yeah, that's the
and
square.
You hit the square.
Yeah, I'm looking to get married after.
Yeah.
You got in, you hit. I've got 2 or 3 units within the next turn able to hit. If they survive, those volley fires, we saw an example of that. I mean, just devastating.
Ooh, yeah.
Well, how many did you take in one turn? What was it?
25.
25 casualties. Yeah, that's a lot.
We will definitely lose many more units, but
We're getting in.
we're getting in, yeah.
Greg's attack on Chow's horse resolves first, and it's the Zulu left horn that emerges victorious, not only wiping out significant numbers of cavalry, but also claiming the life of Anthony Durnford himself. To the north, however, Dave's right horn is not as lucky. Ed does indeed roll high and demonstrates that the bayonet can be more than a match for the Zulu Iklwa, and he drives Dave's forces back, leaving them pinned. Thereafter, repeated volleys prevent Tom from closing in to help Dave and steadily whittle away at multiple regiments. For today's game, if the Zulu forces are going to break, it will be by regiment and will occur once each one suffers 33% casualties. While hitting that 33% mark against Greg's larger Zulu regiments to the east will be difficult, Tom and Dave's regiments to the north of Ed's square are much smaller, providing a glimmer of hope for the Redcoats. Over the course of the next couple of turns, Dave manages to circle around the south of Ed's square as well, which is now engaged on all sides, while Greg tries to blast through Chow's remaining forces and the British native allies to get at the square. The fight is now at its most desperate, and it's at this critical moment that we amazingly experience our own partial solar eclipse. Suddenly, For the first time today, a Zulu regiment breaks and flees the field. It's Dave's Isanku regiment to the northwest of Ed Square. Could our Zulu commanders be watching what had seemed like a sure victory begin to slip away?
My problem is that our largest regiment, our 6,000-man regiment, has kind of gotten pinched off. It's out of room. The frontage of the British has gotten so small that there's less and less room for us to funnel troops.
That's right. They essentially need a few regiments in front to melt away, which we are doing.
Which you're doing.
As fast as we can. I haven't had a regiment break yet, but every time the British fire out of that square using volley fire, I mean, it's just brutal. You lose half of a base. And the way the rules work also is it spreads fire back through, so it really does. It's very painful.
And unlike you, I've actually lost a whole regiment already. But my biggest problem is that I'm getting to melee. I've gotten like at least 3 or 4 melees in, but the dice have not been kind to me. The British bayonet drill is just going to town, and my bodies are stacking up. And right now I've got 5 units that are all pinned and can't move.
The interesting thing is it's brutal, but every less British rifleman firing at you eventually will help us.
Unwilling to give Ed even a moment of respite, Tom urges his warriors into a furious charge into melee combat. The fighting is vicious, but Ed's redcoats emerge victorious again, not just inflicting massive casualties, but also breaking 2 of Tom's regiments. While Ed has almost cleared the field of Zulus to the north of his square, it has come at a high price. The loss of each of his bases is a huge loss in firepower, and Ed will need that firepower to survive any assault from Greg's massive Left Horn regiments. Speaking of Greg, he's about to make what could be his final assault on Chow's remaining cavalry.
The command system in Men Who Would Be Kings is actually pretty simple. There are free actions that you can take, but there are also actions that you have to make a roll for. So for the Zulus, you actually do have to make a roll to charge. Our leadership is a 7, so I need a 7 or better on 2d6 to try to close in on Chow's horse over there. And in this case, I got an 11, so we're going in.
Chow's remaining forces are no match for Greg's Zulus, and finally bowing to the reality of the situation, Chow follows an order from Ed to run at least a single base of troopers off the table to get out word of the disaster. Back at the square, Ed has survived another assault by one of Dave's regiments, causing it to become the 4th Zulu regiment to break and flee. But with Chow no longer slowing down Greg, and with Ed having suffered significant casualties of his own, the writing now appears to be on the wall. Ed maintains his square as long as possible, but is simply unable to hold off the last push by our Zulu commanders. Just as it did historically, our Battle of Isandlwana has resulted in a crushing defeat for the British.
Well, after almost 2 hours of bloody fighting, our Isandlwana is over. And it was pretty much a historical result, although the English who did manage to inflict quite a bit more casualties on the Zulus, probably around 4,200 casualties, so some serious damage there, but the British were almost entirely wiped out. Chow, you did manage to get one of your units off the board to go back to Rourke's Drift and help Makar and let them know that trouble's brewing.
On orders, on orders.
Well, guys, I think it's safe to say that we all got our spears wet today. It's kind of difficult holding this to imagine someone thrusting this into you, but we had a lot of close combat. How do you guys think the plan of being patient unfolded?
Well, so I mean, I think our plan worked reasonably. What would we have done differently? I mean, I think there's always the issue with this of spreading your troops out as much as you can, but the British really, by the time you get to close with them, you're dealing with maybe a 20-inch perimeter.
if even.
And it's they're obviously going to stack up troops.
And you have to give credit to the British. If they had stayed anywhere where they were historically, we would have steamrolled them with minimal casualties probably. It really pulling back to the base of the hill and forming square was their best defense.
Yeah.
You know, Ed, one thing I do like here on Little Wars TV is when we play out history the way that it happened, and today we played out history the way it happened by getting almost everyone underneath our commands killed.
Pretty much.
I made a mistake. I thought I was pulling back my cavalry command far enough. Obviously, I didn't. Really should have pulled them back much further to set up that first defensive line, allowing the Zulus to converge and block each other's way, because you realize at some point that's one of the key components of this battle, is having the Zulus stand in their own way to close with you.
Well, maybe, Chow, but I kind of think you're being a little too hard on yourself there. I don't think it would have mattered much either way.
But what about your square? Without the rocky slope behind you, that square actually was horrible.
Yeah,
Oh,
it
my word.
was effective. A clear field of fire would have been what's wanted, but that's where the ammunition wagons were, so that's where we went.
Yeah, I feel though that if I could have put some of the irregular cavalry companies, independent cavalry companies, onto that side of the slope, I could have messed up the Zulu regiments that were coming up across from your blind side, and kept them off of you for a few more turns. I'm not sure that we would have gotten out of here, but it probably would have been a better game plan today.
Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to stay tuned. Hit that subscribe button down at the bottom so that you can see every one of the tutorials we're going to be posting over the next few weeks on a number of things. Also, some great interviews, some great battlefield tours from my trip to Africa. I can't wait to share it with you and hope that you'll be watching.